There is something most of you will recognize. You sit down to read something that genuinely matters, a book, a long article, something worth your time. And within a few minutes, your attention starts drifting. You reach for your phone without deciding to. You read the same paragraph twice and absorb nothing. You used to read for hours without effort. Now 20 minutes feels like a serious act of will. And the strange part is that you know something has shifted. You can feel it in the shorter fuse for anything demanding, the reduced patience for an argument that takes more than a minute to follow, the vague and uncomfortable sense that the way you think has changed, without you fully noticing and without your permission. Most people assume this is a personal failing, a lack of discipline, something to fix with a better morning routine. It isn't. The PISA 2022 assessment, one of the largest international education studies ever conducted, recorded the steepest single-cycle decline in reading and mathematics since the study began in the year 2000, across dozens of countries simultaneously. We are, by measurable standards, comprehending less at the precise moment in history when we have access to more information than any civilization before us. That isn't a coincidence, it's a result. What's happened is that several powerful forces, some ancient, some built in the last decade, have quietly converged around a single effect, making deep thinking feel unnecessary, making it feel like an optional extra, something for academics and philosophers, not for ordinary life. And once you understand how they work together, it changes how you read the news, how you scroll through your feed, and how you understand the forces that have been reshaping your mind without your permission. 2,400 years ago, Plato described a group of prisoners chained in a cave, facing a blank wall. Behind them, a fire burns. Between the fire and the prisoners, figures pass, casting shadows on the wall ahead. The prisoners have seen nothing else their entire lives, so they do the most natural thing imaginable. They take the shadows for reality. They name them, argue about them, develop genuine expertise in reading the patterns on the wall, and they feel thoroughly informed doing it. And when one prisoner escapes, sees the actual world outside and returns to describe what he found, the others don't thank him. They try to kill him. What Plato was describing wasn't a story about ancient ignorance. He was describing the default state of human consciousness. Most people, at most times, experience a version of reality shaped by the limited information they're given, filtered through the expectations of their group, and mistaken for the whole picture. The prisoners aren't stupid. They're doing exactly what anyone does with the information available to them. The problem isn't their intelligence, it's that they've never seen the fire, never seen outside, and they've built an entire sense of identity and community around interpreting the shadows correctly. The cave isn't just a physical space, it's where everyone they know lives, where everything makes sense, and where leaving would mean abandoning all of it. Plato didn't present this as a fixable design flaw, he presented it as the permanent human condition. Turning towards the light was always possible. It was just genuinely difficult. It required leaving behind the familiar, and it cost you something real. The people who did it were rarely thanked for it. Now ask yourself, what happens when someone builds a system designed to make the wall more compelling? Not to chain you, you can always put the phone down. But what if the shadows are so vivid, so personalized, and so perfectly calibrated to your existing fears and interests that turning around simply stops occurring to you? That is the world we're living in. And it was built, quite deliberately, by some of the most intelligent people alive. Think about the last time you were genuinely lost somewhere, physically lost with no idea how to get where you were going. You looked around, made judgments, backtracked, figured it out. You built something in your mind through that process. Now think about how rarely that happens today with GPS available on your phone at all times. Studies on spatial cognition show that people who use GPS navigation regularly develop significantly weaker mental maps of their own cities compared to people who navigate manually. You can drive the same route 20 times and still be unable to describe it, because your brain correctly calculated that it didn't need to bother storing the information. The phone had it. The same principle is running across almost every area of daily life. Autocomplete finishes your sentences before your thoughts are fully formed. You reach for your phone the moment a question arises, before the mind has had any time to sit with the question itself. Algorithms curate everything you read, so your mind almost never encounters a genuinely surprising idea, the kind that forces you to recalibrate. A 2011 study from Columbia University confirmed what many people were already sensing. When people know information is easily retrievable, they stop forming lasting memories of it. People became better at remembering where to find information than at retaining the information itself. Memory outsourced to machines. And like any capacity that goes unexercised, the mind adjusts around its absence. What's actually being lost here is subtler than forgetting facts. It's the process of working through something, holding an idea in your head, turning it over, connecting it to something you already know, being wrong, and arriving somewhere you didn't expect. That process is where genuine understanding forms. It's slow and uncomfortable, and modern life has gotten extraordinarily good at skipping straight past it. Think about what searching used to involve. You looked up one thing and found yourself 3 topics deep an hour later, following threads you hadn't planned. Dead ends, accidental discoveries, time spent with a problem before it resolved. Your brain was building something the entire time. That whole process now takes several seconds and produces the feeling of knowing, without the experience of understanding. We called it progress. Something real was lost in the transaction. Long before social media existed, people worried about a simpler version of this problem. The fear about television wasn't that it would lie to people. It was that it would give people so much stimulation, so much passive entertainment, and so little productive discomfort that they'd gradually lose interest in anything requiring sustained attention to understand. Nobody would need to suppress ideas. People would just stop being interested in ideas that were difficult. That prediction turned out to be accurate and then dramatically understated by what came next. Tristan Harris spent years working as a design ethicist inside Google, paid specifically to ask whether what they were building was genuinely good for the people using it. He resigned and went public with what he'd seen. He described the major social media platforms as engaged in what he called a race to the bottom of the brainstem. The goal wasn't to inform or entertain in any conventional sense. The goal was to trigger the oldest, fastest reacting parts of your nervous system, the parts that respond to threat, to novelty, to social comparison, and to outrage. Every notification, every inflammatory headline, every perfectly timed recommendation, all of it engineered with precision to keep those systems activated as long as possible. Here's the mechanism that makes this so damaging. Those fast, reactive systems and the slower, deliberate part of the brain, the part that reads carefully, reasons through problems, and changes its mind based on evidence, they compete for the same limited mental resources. Hours of constant microstimulation builds the reactive system. The deliberate one, like any skill that goes unexercised, gradually deteriorates. And it didn't start with the phone. Most people spent more than a decade in a school system built around a very similar principle. Receive information, store it accurately, return it on demand. The questions were provided. The answers were expected to match. There wasn't much space for sitting with something unresolved or following a question somewhere unexpected. The habit of passively receiving rather than actively questioning was installed early in most people, long before the algorithm showed up. The algorithm didn't create passive thinking. It found a population already inclined toward it and built an extraordinarily profitable business model on top. Friedrich Nietzsche described something in the 19th century that has become, in the age of the algorithm, the central mechanism of how beliefs spread and survive. In his work on what he called herd morality, Nietzsche argued that most people don't form their beliefs through independent reasoning. They absorb the beliefs of whatever group they belong to, driven less by argument than by the far more powerful force of social belonging. The herd enforces itself without any central authority. Step outside what your group believes, and the response usually isn't a counter-argument. It's social discomfort, the raised eyebrow, the quiet distancing, the sense of having said the wrong thing in front of people whose opinion of you matters. Think about the last time you changed your position publicly on something your group felt strongly about. Think about what that felt like, the hesitation, the weight of it. That wasn't accidental. That was the real cost of independent thinking, experienced in real time. Psychologists call the cognitive version of this confirmation bias the tendency to seek out information confirming what you already believe and to discount anything that challenges it. But Nietzsche's insight goes further. It isn't only a cognitive quirk. It's socially enforced. We don't just confirm our own beliefs privately, we conform to our tribe's beliefs publicly, because the alternative carries a social cost that most people would rather avoid. What the algorithm does, with a precision no previous era could have achieved, is take this ancient human tendency and industrialize it. It identifies which group you belong to, amplifies the information that confirms what that group believes, filters out the rest, and does all of this so seamlessly that it feels like you've independently arrived at your conclusions. You haven't been told what to think. You've been shown an increasingly intense version of what you already believed, until the space outside that version stops feeling real. Nietzsche had a name for where this leads. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he describes the last man, the endpoint of a society that has optimized entirely for comfort and safety. The last man doesn't struggle, create, or risk anything that could fail. He's reached a state of permanent satisfaction. He blinks slowly and says, "We have invented happiness." He isn't a villain. He's pleasant, agreeable, easy to be around. He simply stopped engaging with anything that might disturb the equilibrium. He traded the fire for the shadow long enough ago that he no longer remembers there was ever anything else. And he isn't suffering, and that's the whole problem. The question worth sitting with: how much of what you believe have you actually examined, versus how much arrived through your group and has been sitting there, unchallenged ever since? None of this happened by accident, and none of it requires anyone to be malicious for it to continue. Social media platforms benefit because emotional, reactive users generate more engagement than calm, reflective ones, and engagement is what the revenue model runs on. Outrage and fear keep people on the platform in a way that satisfaction and clarity simply don't. Reflective people who read carefully and think before responding are less profitable than people who react immediately and often. Political communication across the full spectrum benefits from the same environment. Slogans travel faster than arguments. A message engineered to trigger a fast emotional response is cheaper to produce and easier to spread than one requiring careful reasoning to evaluate. A person who pauses to think is considerably harder to move than one who responds immediately to an emotionally charged framing. This applies equally across every political position that has ever existed. Consumer markets benefit because impulsive people make worse purchasing decisions than deliberate ones. Every countdown timer on a sale, every one-click purchase option, every limited availability warning exists specifically to engage the fast, reactive mind before the slower, more deliberate one can ask whether this is actually a good idea. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, spent his career documenting the gap between how human judgment actually works and how we prefer to think it works. One of his most striking findings: the feeling of being fully informed is profoundly disconnected from actually being informed. High confidence and high accuracy frequently move in opposite directions. The people who feel most certain about a subject are often the least accurate about it. The modern information environment was built to produce the feeling of certainty because certainty drives engagement, and engagement drives everything. These systems don't need to coordinate with each other. They each follow their own incentive. The combined effect is a world where shallow thinking is quietly and consistently rewarded, and deep thinking is quietly and consistently inconvenient. Let's come back to the cave. The prisoner who escapes doesn't escape into comfort. He faces a fire that temporarily blinds him. He emerges into sunlight that is overwhelming. When he returns and tries to describe what he found, the others can't follow him because their eyes have adjusted to the dark. And Plato is honest about what happens. They would rather remove the person disrupting their certainty than examine whether their certainty is warranted. This is the cost the whole video has been building toward. Independent thinking is difficult in a way that goes beyond effort. It requires genuine willingness to be uncertain, to hold a question open longer than is comfortable, to engage seriously with the strongest version of a view you currently reject. The instinct is always to find the weakest version of positions you oppose, because defeating a weak argument feels satisfying. Engaging seriously with a strong one is something else entirely. It requires the real possibility that you might change your mind, and that possibility is exactly what the herd, the algorithm, and the attention economy are all, in their different ways, working to eliminate. The most practical thing anyone can do inside this environment is straightforward. When you encounter an idea, resist the impulse to immediately look it up or immediately dismiss it. Sit with it. Try to reconstruct what you already know from memory, without assistance, imperfectly. Try genuinely to argue it from a position you don't hold. Research in cognitive science consistently shows that this kind of effortful engagement, sitting with something unresolved rather than instantly resolving it, builds understanding that lasts. The discomfort you feel doing it is the signal that something real is happening in your mind. It's the sign that you've left the wall. Plato and Nietzsche arrived at versions of the same conclusion by very different routes. Thinking clearly is unnatural, and it has always been. The cave is the human default, and so is the herd. What's genuinely new is the sophistication of the system now built around those tendencies. The algorithm identifies your group and amplifies its certainty. Years of schooling trained you to reproduce answers rather than question them. A business model profits from your reactivity. None of these things conspire with each other, and none of them need to. The combined effect is a world where Nietzsche's last man, satisfied, certain, and entirely unchallenged, is simply the path of least resistance. The prisoner who turns toward the fire knows it will temporarily blind him, that the others will resent him for it, and that once he sees what's outside, the comfort of the cave is gone permanently. He turns anyway. What is one belief you're completely certain about that you've never genuinely tested? That's where the cave is. If this made you think, share it with someone who would argue with it. That friction is exactly what this conversation needs more of.